Gorilla stands guard in the jungle. What it's protecting will amaze you. The jungle was alive, yet eerily silent. The dense canopy overhead barely let the sun pierce through, casting streaks of dim, golden light onto the forest floor. A thin mist curled between the trees, rising slowly, like silent whispers from the earth itself. Everything seemed frozen. No rustling leaves, no chirping birds, only the muffled crunch of footsteps against the damp ground. Deep in the heart of the untamed jungle, something or someone stood still. Immense, imposing, and seemingly carved from the shadows stood a giant silverback gorilla, its wide chest heaving with slow, deliberate breaths. Eyes like burning coals watched the narrow path ahead, unmoving and unyielding. No living soul dared challenge its presence. Not a serpent slithered, not a predator prowled. This was its ground, a sacred space guarded with a sense of purpose that defied explanation. For young Ethan Caldwell, the jungle had always been a place of wonder and mystery. His father, Dr. Richard Caldwell, was a respected biologist whose life's work revolved around studying wildlife in remote, untouched regions of the world. Together, father and son had ventured into countless forests before, but this expedition was different. As Ethan followed closely behind his father, his eyes darted around nervously. This wasn't like the jungles of South America or Africa they'd traversed before. Here, in this forgotten corner of the world, an island shrouded in legends, the jungle felt alive. Its silence was unnerving, as if something watched them from behind every tree trunk and vine. Dr. Caldwell walked confidently, his machete slicing through the thick undergrowth. "Ethan," he said softly, glancing back at his son. "Remember, the animals here are not what you've read about. The villagers, they speak of things that science can't explain." Ethan furrowed his brow. "Like what, Dad?" His father stopped for a moment, the wind carrying the faint sound of distant howls, low, mournful, and impossible to place. Dr. Caldwell's face darkened. "The stories say there's a guardian here, a creature that doesn't belong to this world, protects something. What it is, no one really knows." Ethan swallowed hard. His imagination raced, painting pictures of monstrous beasts hiding just out of sight. But the 12-year-old was brave, and he trusted his father's calm resolve. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of invisible eyes following their every step. Suddenly, a noise, a deep, guttural growl echoed through the trees. It wasn't the sound of a tiger, nor a bear. It was something far deeper, a primal warning that sent shivers down Ethan's spine. "What was that?" Ethan whispered, clutching his father's backpack strap. Dr. Caldwell froze. "Quiet." The pair crept forward cautiously, guided only by instinct and the faint calls of nature. They hadn't gone far when they stumbled upon it. A clearing bathed in soft sunlight, and there, like a monolith of ancient times, the gorilla stood. The silverback was larger than anything Ethan had seen in his life, its presence commanding both fear and awe. Its thick black fur rippled under the sunlight, its muscular arms crossed before it like a king surveying his throne. But it was the gorilla's eyes that froze Ethan in place. They were intelligent, piercing, and strangely protective. Dr. Caldwell lifted a trembling hand to stop Ethan. "Don't move," he breathed. The gorilla watched them in silence. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the creature wasn't threatening them. It was warning them. But warning them of what? Slowly, the gorilla turned its head, its gaze shifting to something on the other side of the clearing. Ethan followed its eyes, and his breath hitched. There was something behind the trees. Shrouded in vines and shadows, something gleamed faintly. A soft glow that didn't belong in the natural world. Ethan strained to see, but before he could take a step forward, the gorilla let out a roar so powerful it seemed to shake the very earth beneath their feet. Ethan stumbled backward as his father grabbed him by the arm. "We need to go now." "But, Dad, what's behind there?" Ethan shouted, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and curiosity. Dr. Caldwell shook his head, his expression one of both terror and awe. "I don't know, Ethan, but that gorilla isn't here by accident." The silverback stepped forward, blocking their path. Its growl was quieter now, almost pleading. It was protecting something. Something it would not let them or anyone see. What could a gorilla be guarding so fiercely in the middle of a forgotten jungle? And why did its eyes hold such a profound sadness? Ethan's heart raced as he stared into those eyes. Eyes that seemed to be begging him to leave, to turn back before it was too late. But the boy couldn't ignore the glow he'd seen, the mystery hidden within the trees. Dr. Caldwell tugged at Ethan's arm, forcing him to retreat. "Come on, Ethan, we can't stay here." But as they turned to leave, the air shifted. A new sound echoed through the jungle. A whisper, almost human, drifting toward them on the wind. Ethan glanced back one last time. The gorilla stood unmoving, its gaze fixed on the shadows. Somewhere deep in the jungle, something waited, something important enough for the king of the forest to guard it with its life. What is the gorilla hiding? Why does it seem to protect it with such desperation? Stay with us as this mystery unravels. You won't believe what's waiting in the shadows of the jungle. What do you think the gorilla could be protecting? A treasure? A lost secret? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to stay tuned for the rest of the story. The silence of the jungle was no longer comforting. It was suffocating. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he and his father hurried back toward their camp, their boots sinking into the wet earth. Every step felt heavier, as if the jungle itself didn't want them to leave. "What was that all about, Dad?" Ethan asked breathlessly, glancing back over his shoulder. The silverback's image burned in his mind. Those watchful eyes, that desperate roar. Dr. Caldwell didn't answer right away. His usually confident expression was clouded with concern. "I don't know, Ethan," he said finally, his voice tight, "but we shouldn't be here. That gorilla, it wasn't just protecting its territory. It was protecting something else." Ethan stopped. "But don't you want to know what? You always say nature has secrets, and it's our job to uncover them." Dr. Caldwell hesitated, looking down at his son. Ethan had his mother's curiosity and determination, traits that had pushed their family into dangerous adventures more than once. He sighed. "We'll talk about it later. Let's get back to camp." That night, as the jungle came alive with sounds of nocturnal creatures, Ethan lay in his tent, staring up at the fabric ceiling. His father's words echoed in his mind. The villagers, they speak of things that science can't explain. Ethan turned over, restless. Outside, he could hear his father speaking in hushed tones with their guide, Amaze, a local who had grown up in these jungles. Amaze was older, with weathered skin and dark, searching eyes. He had a quiet respect for the forest and its legends, a respect Ethan's father didn't seem to share. Creeping closer to the tent flap, Ethan listened. Amaze's voice was low but urgent. "You should leave this place, Dr. Caldwell. The Guardian has shown itself to you. That is a warning." Dr. Caldwell replied, his tone measured. "What is it guarding, Amaze?" "I saw something light behind the trees. There's something there." Amaze shook his head. "It is not for us to know. The stories say the Guardian protects a great secret, a secret left behind by the old world. Those who go looking for it, they do not return." "Superstition," Dr. Caldwell said dismissively. Amaze's face darkened. "Then you are a fool." Ethan's pulse quickened. A great secret. His mind spun with possibilities. He'd always loved stories of hidden treasures and ancient mysteries, and now one was right in front of him. Unable to resist, Ethan made up his mind. He had to see it for himself. The next morning, the jungle greeted them with thick humidity and a strange, ominous stillness. Ethan waited until his father was distracted, organizing gear with Amaze. Then, with his small backpack and a canteen of water, he slipped away into the trees. The path was faint, but Ethan's memory guided him. Every rustle of leaves or snapping of twigs made him jump, but he pressed on. He had to know what the silverback was guarding. Was it treasure? An ancient ruin? Something far more incredible? Ethan's curiosity was stronger than his fear. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. It was hard to tell in the thick maze of green. Sweat dripped down his face as he pushed through the undergrowth, brushing aside vines and branches. Finally, he reached the clearing. And there it was, the silverback. It stood in the center of the clearing, its massive frame still as stone. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. The gorilla turned its head slowly, its dark eyes locking onto him. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, Ethan noticed something new. Behind the gorilla, the glow was stronger now. Faint beams of golden light shining through a curtain of thick vines. Whatever was hidden there, it was close. The gorilla let out a low rumble, not of anger, but of warning. Ethan took a cautious step forward, his voice soft. "I don't want to hurt you. I want to see." The gorilla huffed, beating its chest once. A sound like distant thunder. Ethan's heart raced, but his feet moved on their own. He edged closer, inch by inch, until the vines were within reach. He looked back at the silverback. The great beast watched him, its expression unreadable. It didn't stop him. With trembling hands, Ethan pushed the vines aside. What he saw stole the breath from his lungs. Before him lay a massive stone structure, half buried beneath years of vines and moss. It looked like an ancient temple, its walls carved with intricate patterns of animals, people, and symbols Ethan couldn't understand. The faint golden light came from within, spilling through cracks in the stone as if the temple itself was alive. Ethan stepped closer, entranced. The air here was thick, humming with an energy he couldn't explain. It felt like the jungle itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, Ethan heard footsteps behind him. "Ethan!" He spun around to see his father and Amari burst into the clearing. Dr. Caldwell's face was a mix of anger and relief. "What are you doing here?" Ethan pointed toward the temple. "Dad, look!" Dr. Caldwell's expression changed as he followed his son's gaze. His jaw dropped, and for a moment he said nothing. "My God!" Amari stepped forward, his face pale. "You should not have come here. What is this place?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Amari's eyes flicked to the temple, then back to the gorilla, who still stood watching them. "The stories say this is a sanctuary, a place left behind by the old ones to protect something sacred. The guardian ensures it stays hidden." Dr. Caldwell shook his head in disbelief. This could rewrite history." He pulled a camera from his bag, aiming it at the temple. "We need to document this." Amari grabbed his arm. "No, you will anger the guardian." "Dad, stop," Ethan pleaded, a knot of unease forming in his stomach. The gorilla let out a loud, guttural roar, its massive hands beating against the ground. The earth trembled beneath their feet. Dr. Caldwell ignored it, stepping closer to the temple entrance. "We can't just leave this here." Amari backed away, his voice rising. "You don't understand. There are things in this world that man is not meant to find." Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook violently. Ethan stumbled, his father grabbing his arm to steady him. The silverback let out a ferocious roar, but it wasn't aimed at them. It was aimed at the temple. From deep within, a low rumble answered. And then something moved. The golden light within the temple flared brighter as a deep, rhythmic pounding echoed from the stone walls. Ethan's skin prickled with fear. "Dad, something's waking up." Dr. Caldwell took a step back, his face pale. "We need to go. Now." Amari didn't wait. He grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him away as the silverback stood its ground, roaring louder than ever. The jungle itself seemed to scream in protest, leaves shaking and branches snapping. Ethan looked back as they fled. The temple pulsed with light, and the gorilla, the guardian, stood tall and defiant, facing whatever had stirred within. Hours later, back at their camp, Ethan sat silently by the fire. The tremors had stopped, but the jungle felt different now. Its silence was heavier, its shadows darker. Dr. Caldwell sat across from him, staring into the flames. "We shouldn't have gone there," he said quietly. "Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved." Ethan nodded. In his mind, he could still see the silverback, its eyes full of purpose, of warning. It wasn't just guarding the temple. It was guarding the world from what lay inside. What had they disturbed in the heart of the jungle? And would the guardian be enough to contain it? What do you think lies within the temple? Could it be something ancient, dangerous, or beyond imagination? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for part 3 of this mystery. The jungle was still, unnervingly so. Ethan, Dr. Caldwell, and Amari sat huddled near their campfire, trying to process what they had seen. The temple, the golden light, the deep pounding from within. It felt as though the earth itself had come alive, threatening to shake them off its back. Amari broke the silence, his voice low and steady. The guardian did not attack you because it knew you were foolish, not evil. Dr. Caldwell looked up sharply. What do you mean? The silverback is not just an animal. It is a sentinel chosen by forces beyond your understanding. It guards this place because what sleeps within the temple is not meant to wake. You are lucky you are alive. Ethan, sitting with his knees drawn to his chest, looked at Amari. What's in the temple? What did we see? Amari hesitated, staring deep into the fire as if searching for answers. There is a story passed down among my people. It tells of the old ones, a civilization that lived long before ours. They were powerful, able to command the earth, the skies, and even the beasts. But their greed led them to darkness. What kind of darkness? Ethan whispered. Amari met his gaze. They created something they could not control, a force so dangerous it could destroy everything. Fearing what they had unleashed, they locked it away deep in the jungle and sealed it within that temple. They entrusted a guardian, an eternal protector, chosen by the spirit of the jungle itself. The silverback you saw is part of a line of guardians that have watched over the temple for centuries. Dr. Caldwell rubbed his hands over his face, disbelief written all over him. This is madness. You're talking about legends, Amari. Myths. Amari's expression hardened. Did it feel like a myth when the ground shook? When the temple answered your intrusion? The weight of Amari's words pressed on them like a stone. Ethan swallowed hard, remembering the silverback's roar and the pulsing light from within the temple. Something had stirred. Something alive. Dr. Caldwell's voice was strained, but curious. But what is it? What did the old ones lock away? Amari shook his head. No one knows for certain. The stories call it the heart of the earth. Some believe it is a living force, an ancient power that can bend nature to its will. Others say it is a curse, one that could swallow the world in chaos. Silence followed his words, broken only by the distant sound of leaves rustling in the wind. Ethan stood abruptly, his face pale. We can't just leave it like this. If something's waking up, then what happens to the guardian? To the jungle? Amari's dark eyes softened. The guardian will fight, as it has for centuries. But this time, I fear it will not be enough. The following morning, Ethan awoke to chaos. The ground trembled again. Short, violent bursts, as though something enormous was moving beneath the earth. Dr. Caldwell burst into Ethan's tent, his face tense. We're leaving. Now. What's happening? Ethan asked, scrambling to pack his things. Amari stood outside, his gaze fixed on the treeline. The jungle is angry. It knows the seal has been weakened. Before they could move, an earth-shaking roar cut through the air. A sound so loud it echoed across the trees like a rolling storm. Ethan's blood ran cold. The guardian, he breathed. Stay here, Dr. Caldwell ordered. Ethan, I mean it. But Ethan couldn't. He grabbed his pack and ran toward the clearing, his heart hammering in his chest. He had to know what was happening. He had to see. When he arrived, the sight before him stole the air from his lungs. The silverback was there, its massive form standing in front of the temple, its chest heaving as it roared again and again, fists pounding the earth. But it wasn't alone. From the cracks of the temple, black smoke was pouring out, thick and unnatural. It twisted like living tendrils, stretching toward the sky. And then the smoke formed shapes, shadows with eyes that glowed faintly red. They slithered forward, writhing as if hungry for something. Ethan watched in horror as the silverback charged, its powerful arms swinging at the shadows. It roared furiously, its deep, guttural cries echoing across the clearing. It was fighting to push the darkness back, but the shadows were relentless. They struck like whips, lashing at the gorilla's body, forcing it back step by step. The earth beneath Ethan's feet shook violently, and cracks spread out like spiderwebs. Dr. Caldwell and Amari arrived moments later. Amari shouted, his voice ragged. "The seal has broken. We must go." "No!" Ethan yelled. "The Guardian needs help." The silverback let out a pained roar as a shadow struck its chest, knocking it to the ground. Ethan's heart dropped as the beast struggled to rise, its strength fading against the relentless swarm of darkness. Dr. Caldwell grabbed Ethan's arm. "We can't do anything. Come on." Ethan pulled away, his voice breaking. "We can't just leave it. It's trying to protect all of us." His father hesitated, torn between reason and his son's desperate plea. Amari turned to them. "The temple. It must be resealed. The light inside is the key. That's why the Guardian fights, to buy time for the seal to be restored." Ethan looked at the temple, the golden glow still flickering faintly from within. "I'll go." Dr. Caldwell's face paled. "Ethan, no." But it was too late. Ethan ran toward the temple, weaving between the cracks in the earth. The silverback saw him and roared, not in anger but in desperate warning. Ethan ignored it. He couldn't let the Guardian fight alone. The air around him grew cold as the shadows turned their attention toward him. The tendrils lashed out, but the silverback, with a surge of strength, leapt between Ethan and the darkness. It roared one last time, its body shielding the boy as Ethan slipped past into the temple's entrance. Inside, the golden light was brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. The carvings on the walls seemed to move, depicting an endless battle between light and darkness. At the center of the chamber stood a stone pedestal, and on it sat a glowing crystal heart, the source of the golden light. Ethan didn't hesitate. He ran to the pedestal, his chest heaving. As his hands touched the crystal, the entire temple shook violently, and the shadows outside screamed in rage. "Ethan!" His father's voice echoed from behind. Amari's voice followed, shouting, "Restore the light. It's the only way." Ethan lifted the crystal heart. Its warmth spread through him, and instinctively, he held it high. The golden light exploded outward, bursting through the cracks in the temple like 1,000 suns. Outside, the shadows writhed and screamed as the light consumed them, dissolving them into nothingness. The silverback let out a victorious roar, its massive body illuminated as if bathed in sunlight. Ethan felt the ground steady beneath him, the tremors easing as the jungle seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. When Ethan emerged, the clearing was quiet. The temple had sealed itself once more, its cracks disappearing as though they had never been. The silverback stood at the entrance, battered and bloodied but still alive. It looked at Ethan, its dark eyes filled with something Ethan could only describe as gratitude. Dr. Caldwell ran to his son, pulling him into a tight embrace. "You crazy, brave kid, you did it." Amari stepped forward, his voice reverent. "The Guardian chose wisely." Ethan turned back to the silverback, who stood tall and proud, its role as the jungle's eternal protector reaffirmed. "What happens now?" Ethan asked quietly. Amari smiled faintly. "The Guardian will remain, watching over the temple and the light. You have given the jungle peace, for now." Ethan nodded, his heart full. He looked at the silverback one last time, knowing he would never forget this moment. It wasn't just a guardian, it was a hero. As they walked back toward camp, Ethan glanced back at the temple, now hidden once more beneath its veil of vines. The jungle had its secrets, and some were better left undisturbed. But one thing was certain, the Guardian would always stand watch. What do you think the heart of the earth really was? And would you have been brave enough to restore the light? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this one. The jungle had returned to its tranquil state, the chaos of the previous days now a distant memory. Sunlight filtered through the trees in golden streams, casting gentle rays on the ground where shadows had once twisted and writhed. The silence was no longer eerie. It was peaceful, like the jungle itself had sighed in relief. Ethan sat on a fallen log, staring at the ancient temple that had nearly swallowed him whole. Vines and moss had already started reclaiming the structure, as though nature was eager to erase the evidence of what had happened. Beside him, Amaze crouched, his gaze fixed on the clearing. "The jungle will heal," Amaze said softly, breaking the silence. "It always does." Ethan looked up, his eyes searching for the silverback. The guardian sat at the edge of the clearing, its massive form partially hidden by the trees. Though battered and scarred, the silverback exuded an aura of strength, its dark eyes still sharp and watchful. Dr. Caldwell joined them, exhaustion written on his face. He sat next to Ethan, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "You were brave back there," he said, his voice filled with rare pride. "But you could have gotten yourself killed." Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah. But we saved it, didn't we?" Dr. Caldwell nodded. "You did. We did." Amaze rose to his feet, his expression serious but calm. "The Guardian's fight is not over. It will remain here, protecting the temple and what lies within it. But your actions gave it time. You restored the light and gave the jungle a chance to endure." The silverback let out a low, rumbling sound, something that almost felt like acknowledgement. It met Ethan's gaze, and for a moment, there was an unspoken understanding between them. "You're incredible, you know that?" Ethan whispered to the silverback. "You're not just a guardian. You're a hero." The silverback pounded its chest once, a powerful and deliberate motion, before turning back toward the depths of the jungle. Slowly, silently, it disappeared into the trees, its dark form vanishing into the shadows. "Where's it going?" Ethan asked. Amaze smiled faintly. "Back to its watch. The jungle is vast, but the guardian will always be near, waiting for those who dare disturb the temple again." Ethan watched the trees, feeling both awe and sadness. The silverback had risked its life for something greater than itself, carrying a burden no one else could. And yet it asked for nothing in return. Dr. Caldwell stood, brushing dirt from his pants. "It's time we head back. This expedition is over." As they gathered their things and made their way out of the clearing, Ethan took one last look at the temple. The sunlight hit its surface at just the right angle, making it gleam faintly as though it were alive. They walked in silence for a while, the jungle now filled with the soft hum of insects and the calls of distant birds. Ethan could almost feel the jungle breathing again, its balance restored, its guardian watching over it. When they finally reached the edge of the forest, Dr. Caldwell paused and turned to Amaze. "You were right about everything. I didn't believe it before. But now I know this place has a power we'll never understand." Amaze inclined his head, his expression wise and resolute. "The jungle does not need to be understood, only respected." Ethan looked back one last time, the canopy of trees looming tall and majestic behind them. The experience had changed him. He could feel it, something deep inside, like a connection to the jungle and the silverback. As they climbed into their vehicle and drove away, Ethan stared out the window, watching the jungle fade into the distance. He smiled faintly to himself, whispering under his breath, "Keep standing guard, big guy." What would you do if you were face to face with a guardian like this? Would you respect its power or challenge it like Ethan and his team? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and join us next time for another unbelievable story you won't forget.